challenges for buildings in the context of the European Green Deal. My name is Antonella Paceto, and I am a student in the Master in International Energy at C.CharveriatSc-Po's Paris School of International Affairs. In this video, I will discuss the importance of decarbonizing the building sector, the different paths to do so, and the current programs being implemented by the EU. We will firstly go through some key facts of buildings in the EU. Secondly, we will discuss certain concepts related to the decarbonization of buildings. Thirdly, we will review some of the main directives under the EU policy framework. And lastly, I will present some concluding remarks. The building sector is key to achieving the objective of net zero emissions by 2050. The International Energy Agency estimates that energy efficiency of buildings has to improve 5 times faster in the next 10 years than it has in the 10 past ones. To give some context, in 2021, buildings accounted for 40% of total EU energy consumption and 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. Given that only 25% of the EU's buildings are considered energy efficient, there is a huge potential to reduce the environmental impact of this sector. A great challenge for the sector is the long lifespan of buildings, which means they tend to lock in their energy use for decades. In the case of the EU, it is estimated that 85 to 95% of buildings will still be standing in 2050. At the same time, on an annual basis, only about 1% of buildings are renovated. There are some concepts regarding buildings that are fundamental for policy discussions. The demand reduction aspect should lead many of the programs to be implemented. It is a challenging proposition given that it implies a behavioral change. This can be guided by regulation and sometimes by pricing. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the regulatory framework has historically proved to be more effective than pricing in shaping energy consumption patterns. An important way of achieving demand reduction is through part-time and part-space conditioning. This means heating or cooling only certain rooms in a building or for a certain time instead of using centralized and constant heating or cooling. The charts show the results of a study that was done in Beijing. The energy consumption of buildings with fans with part-space AC and centralized AC was recorded. As you can see, the average energy consumption for buildings with split AC units was much lower than that of buildings with centralized AC. Other key concepts to take into consideration are shown in this slide. Expanding the use of more efficient appliances is essential. The main problem with this is the affordability and financing. Subsidies or financing schemes such as pay-as-you-save could allow faster adoption of these technologies. The main concern here is the so-called rebound effect, through which the cost saving from efficiency gains result in higher disposable income for the consumer, allowing them to increase the consumption levels. The design of buildings is another key concept. Bioclimatic architecture includes methods of construction that take into account local climate. It allows to optimize sizing of rooms, window placements, natural ventilation systems, and the carbon intensity of materials. Wood products are typically favored over concrete and steel, which are more carbon intensive. Moreover, although circular use of construction and waste materials does not yet have a broad use, sufficiency measures are crucial. They are related to optimizing building use, repurposing existing buildings that are not in use, and prioritizing multifamily housing over single-family homes. Of course, we cannot ignore the prosumers in this process. The term prosumer refers to buildings that both consume and produce energy, mainly by integrating solar panels. Given that on-site renewables require high upfront investment, subsidies or financing instruments like feed-in tariffs help ensure a broad adoption. Lastly, we want to guarantee that no one is left behind in this scheme. A just transition will therefore include different labor groups, ethnicities, age groups, and genders. A special consideration could be taken for the construction industry, which currently generates about 18 million jobs in the EU. As part of the EU Green Deal, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made it a point to have a unified EU policy for a renovation wave, not only to decarbonize, but also as a core feature for the next generation EU economic recovery plan. The following directives are the main ones regarding buildings. The revised Renewable Energy Directive sets a new EU-level target of 40% renewables in the energy mix, including a benchmark of 49% of renewables in buildings. Moreover, the directive encourages energy efficiency and circularity, for instance by facilitating the use of waste heat. The revised Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is an essential part of delivering on the renovation wave strategy and is part of the Fit for 55 program. It establishes that as of 2030, all new buildings must be zero emission, while new public buildings must be zero emissions already by 2027. In addition, the worst performing 15% of the EU building stock will have to be upgraded from Energy Performance Certificate Label G to at least Label F by 2030. Further, it requires residential and commercial building to roll out charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. And it creates a so-called renovation passport, which will give access to information and lower costs for consumers to facilitate a step-by-step renovation. The strengthened Energy Efficiency Directive sets bolder targets for energy savings by 2030, 39% for primary energy consumption and 36% for final energy consumption. It requires member states to renovate at least 3% of the total floor area for all public buildings annually. Lastly, the Renovation Wave initiative in the building sector proposes a setup of new European Bauhaus as a co-creation space to provide a distinct aesthetic in building renovations that match style with sustainability. With this, the EU expects 35 million buildings to be renovated by 2030, with the creation of 160,000 additional green jobs. To conclude, we will look at the international dimensions of these measures. The transformation of this sector could be a great opportunity for the EU to set worldwide standards on how to decarbonize buildings. Other globally adopted EU standards include EU4 for car engines or REACH for chemicals legislation. The fact that the Green Deal is non-binding poses risks to the implementations of these measures, but if the standards are successfully implemented, the EU could be a role model for renovations around the world. The feasibility of these changes will depend to a large extent on the social adaptability and adequate financing schemes to pursue these changes. It is important to properly communicate the proposed policies, firstly, so that the population is aware of the need for a change, and secondly, for all members of society to have a chance to engage in the discussion. As a closing remark, I would like to mention that the need to reduce emissions from buildings is not an isolated issue. It will definitely be approached as part of a broader urban planning project and worked on in parallel to other sectors that will need to be decarbonized, such as the energy or the transport sectors. Thank you very much for your attention. The following slides include references used in this presentation and resources for you to further learn about the topic.